The Grateful Dead spent 5 days on a train in 1970 jamming with Janis Joplin, the band, and Buddy Guy. Jerry Garcia called it the best time I've had in rock and roll. Then the footage disappeared for 3 decades. 90 hours of film, 40 hours of audio, boxed up, mislabeled, and forgotten in Canadian archives while old deadheads told stories nobody could verify. Stories about Garcia organizing a free 7-hour concert on a flatbed truck. About a promoter punching Calgary's mayor in the face. About Pigpen debuting harmonica on new Speedway Boogie. About musicians jamming so hard that a telegraph pole nearly took Mickey Hart's head off.
I've been all night long coming home, don't ease me.
For 30 years, Festival Express was rock and roll's greatest ghost story. Then finally, someone looked in the vault. The concept started simple. Ken Walker and Thor Eaton wanted to create Canada's answer to Woodstock. Put the biggest names in rock on a train, roll across Canada, hitting stadiums in Toronto, Winnipeg, and Calgary. Make the train itself the party. The Dead almost didn't make it. Their Montreal show got canceled 3 days before the tour started. They scrambled to Port Chester, New York instead, then jumped on the Festival Express train with the rest of the lineup. What they created was something else entirely. Jerry Garcia later described what happened. We ripped all the furniture out of the club car and put in amplifiers and instruments. Everyone was into it. No show business, just music. Phil Lesh was more direct. That train was full of insane people making music day and night. The Dead brought their entire crew. Pigpen set up with whiskey in one car. Janis wandered between cars with Southern Comfort. Rick Danko started 8-hour jam sessions. Garcia and Buddy Guy traded blues licks while Prairie rolled past the windows. Musicians rotated through different cars, one for country, another for blues. Eric Anderson, watching it unfold, called it a la Boheme Society. No escape, constant interaction with fellow musicians. Buddy Guy captured the vibe. We didn't even need to ask what people were playing. Everyone knew. Ian Tyson would later admit he lost a drinking contest to Janis and ended up howling at the moon on the roof with Jerry. Nobody slept. Everyone played. The train became a rolling festival that never stopped. Bob Weir explained the difference years later. Woodstock was a treat for the audience. The train was a treat for the performers. Janis Joplin, in her own words, described the philosophy. Playing is just about feeling. It's whatever you feel inside and letting those emotions out. That was Festival Express. Pure feeling, pure music, no boundaries. But Walker and Eaton made one fatal miscalculation. They charged $6 per ticket, about $45 today. To fans coming off Woodstock's free festival vibe, it felt like betrayal, like selling out the counterculture for profit. The youth protest movement in Canada was already organized. They'd formed committees, made posters, planned demonstrations. This wasn't spontaneous anger. This was coordinated resistance to what they saw as corporate exploitation of their culture. By June 27th, when the train pulled into Toronto, thousands of protesters had surrounded CNE Stadium. They weren't asking. They were demanding free admission or they'd shut it down. Some tried rushing the gate. Others blocked every entrance and refused to move. The festival was hours from complete collapse. Jerry walked into the chaos and made a decision. If people wanted free music, the Dead would play for free right now. Before the stadium's show even started, the Grateful Dead set up acoustic on a flatbed truck in Toronto's Coronation Park. They played from 7 p.m. until 4 a.m. the next morning. Songs from Workingman's Dead, which had dropped 3 weeks earlier, Uncle John's Band, Dire Wolf, Cumberland Blues, no tickets, no stage, just music and a growing crowd that eventually numbered in the thousands. It worked. The stadium show happened that night. Casey Jones, China Cat Sunflower, and I Know You Rider. Easy Wind, a massive love light where Pigpen launched into one of his legendary raps. The full version wouldn't surface until 2003, but people who were still there talk about what he actually said. Then Garcia did it again the next day, June 28th, another free park show, this time electric. New Speedway Boogie, good lovin', hours of music. The Dead played 3 hours in Toronto while the other acts watched in disbelief. No recording survived. Set lists are reconstructed from memory. Fans still argue about what was actually played. Meanwhile, Calgary's mayor flew to Toronto demanding Walker lower prices or cancel the show. Ken Walker's response, in his own words, "I punched Calgary Mayor Rod Sykes when he demanded free admission." The show went on. What makes Festival Express musically significant is timing. July 19th, 70 sits dead center in the Dead's transformation. Workingman's Dead had just dropped in June. American Beauty would arrive in November. They were shedding the psychedelic freakouts of Altamont in the late 60s for something earthier. More country, more acoustic, more focused on songcraft and endless improvisation. Festival Express caught the mid-shift, and it shows in every performance. The Calgary show on July 4th is the best documentation we have. It was held at McMahon Stadium in the afternoon heat. The Dead opened with a full acoustic set that showcased where they were headed. Don't Ease Me In, Candyman, one of the earliest acoustic performances of this song ever recorded, Direwolf, Uncle John's Band, Garcia and Weir trading vocals, playing off each other with an ease that only comes from hundreds of shows together. Then Jerry Garcia switched to pedal steel for the New Riders of the Purple Sage set, his side project with Buddy Cage on pedal steel guitar. Garcia was still learning the instrument, but the country influence that would define American Beauty was undeniable. This wasn't the Grateful Dead at Dark Star anymore. This was a Dead discovering what would become Ripple and Broke Down Palace. Buddy Cage later said Jerry was a natural-born ringleader. The amalgamation of country and rock was evolving right in front of us. Then came the electric set. Me and My Uncle to start, then China Cat into Rider with a transition so tight it foreshadowed the extended jams they developed in 1971. The bass runs from Lesh during this transition hinted at the complexity coming. These weren't the sprawling psychedelic journeys of '68 anymore. These were structured, intentional musical conversations. Hard to Handle featured Garcia's serpentine soloing, though the performance never quite catches fire. Maybe the time constraints, maybe the afternoon heat, maybe just an off moment. Even the Dead had those. But New Speedway Boogie was a revelation. Written just months earlier as a response to the Altamont tragedy, the song was still fresh. Pigpen played harmonica, not organ. Harmonica, one of the first times he deployed it on stage. He made it sound like it always belonged there, adding a bluesy edge that deepened the song's warning about violence and chaos. Garcia quoted Nobody's Fault But Mine during his guitar solo, hinting at the gospel and blues covers they'd embraced in later years. The song had weight, it had purpose, it felt like a turning point, and it was. Then came 14 minutes of Love Light. This was Pigpen at absolute peak power. Call and response with the entire stadium. Turn on your love light, let it shine on me. He launched into one of his raunchy raps, the kind that would get heavily edited when the film finally dropped in 2003. The kind that reminded everyone why he'd been the Dead's frontman in the early days before Jerry gradually took over. This was Pigpen's showcase, his moment, the blues shouter who founded the band. Now sharing space with Garcia's country explorations, but still commanding the stage when he wanted it. Only Billy Kreutzmann played drums that day. The sound was looser, more open, less dense. You could hear every instrument clearly. The space between notes mattered as much as the notes themselves. That night, after the official sets wrapped, musicians gathered for an all-star jam during Great Speckled Bird's performance. Garcia, Buddy Cage, Rick Danko from the band, Delaney Bramlett, Ian and Sylvia, CC Ryder, Will the Circle Be Unbroken, musicians traded verses, laughing, sometimes barely staying in key. No one cared about perfection. They were too busy playing. Bob Weir captured what was happening on that train. Most of us had done LSD but never drank. After some guy poured acid into a bottle of Canadian Club, we achieved liftoff. The Dead played Winnipeg on July 1st. Only 4,600 people showed up to the stadium. More protests outside, more financial losses mounting. The Dead played anyway, hangover and all. Phil Lesh later admitted, the hangovers notwithstanding, the bands played really well at that show. Most of that Winnipeg set vanished. Only Easy Wind and Candyman survived on tape, mislabeled and forgotten in a vault. Those two songs became precious artifacts. The only proof that Winnipeg show even existed. The tour bled money with every stop. Walker and Eaton lost everything. The dream of a traveling festival died somewhere between Winnipeg and Calgary. But something else happened on that train that would take decades to fully understand. That's Festival Express. Music born from chaos. Song inspired by near-death experiences on a moving train. The Dead's willingness to strip things down acoustically, to let country seep into their sound, to trust improvisation over structure. All of it solidified during those 5 days. The tour directly inspired Might as Well, the sense of rolling forward no matter what, making it up as you go along. The communal spirit, the constant jamming, the refusal to let money dictate the music, these weren't just ideals anymore. They were lived experiences that would shape how the Dead approached everything that came after. Phil Lesh saw the train as more than just transportation. Trains are magnets of adventure and romance. We saw them as freedom. That freedom came with a price. The tour lost money, the promoters went bankrupt, but the Dead walked away with something more valuable than profit, proof that their new direction was working. Then everything disappeared. 90 hours of 16mm film, 40 hours of audio, boxed up and stored in Canadian archives after Walker and Eaton couldn't afford to do anything with it. For 3 decades, Festival Express only existed in stories. Old Deadheads would talk about the train, the jams, Garcia on the flatbed truck, Pigpen's harmonica debut, but there was no proof. The problem wasn't just storage. Nobody knew what they actually had. Tapes were labeled with the wrong cities, Winnipeg recordings marked as Calgary, Toronto shows mixed was Calgary Auto, dates were wrong, bands were wrong, songs attributed to artists that weren't even on that train. Some reels had no labels at all. Others had labels that contradicted the actual content. For researchers trying to piece together what actually happened, it was an archival nightmare. The Dead setlist archivists at Jerry Base spent years cross-referencing audience memories with a few surviving photographs. They'd find a photo of Garcia playing pedal steel and try to figure out which day, which city, which set. Dead.net forums became battlegrounds of memory. I swear they played Addicts of My Life in Toronto. Someone else would counter, no, that was Portchester the week before. The Montreal show got canceled, remember? Another voice. Are we even sure the Toronto Park show happened? Where's the proof? Without recordings, there is no way to settle any of it. Festival Express became a ghost tour. Legendary, transformative, but frustratingly unprovable. Fans who've been there would share memories, but memories fade and shift. Details get fuzzy, set lists blur together. One fan on Dead.net in 2008 captured the collective frustration. Amazing record of a unique journey. I wish we could see more missing footage. The whole thing existed in a weird limbo. Everyone knew Festival Express happened, but what actually happened? That was a question nobody could definitively answer, until filmmaker Bob Smeaton started digging in the late 90s. Smeaton was working on a documentary about festival culture. Someone mentioned Festival Express in passing, this legendary Canadian train tour that had been forgotten. Smeaton got curious. He started making calls, tracking down aging promoters who worked the shows, crew members who'd been on the train. Everyone had stories, but nobody had evidence. Then he found leads to the Canadian archives. Someone mentioned film reels stored in Toronto, boxes of 16mm footage that had been sitting untouched for decades. Smeaton found them, 90 hours of raw footage. Some reels were in decent shape. Others had degradation issues from years of storage, but it was all there. The performances, the train footage, the behind-the-scenes moments that captured what Festival Express actually was. The next several years became an obsessive reconstruction project. Audio engineers had to separate instruments from the soundboard tapes. Editors had to sync mislabeled audio to video segments. The team had to identify musicians in crowd shots. Garcia was already gone. He died in '95, but they got Phil Lesh, Bob Weir, Mickey Hart, Ken Walker, band members from the band, and Delaney and Bonnie. Everyone had pieces of the puzzle. Everyone remembered different details. Slowly, the Festival Express came back into focus. Cities got matched to footage, dates got verified, songs got properly attributed, the chaos of the archives became a coherent narrative. In 2003, the Festival Express documentary finally dropped in theaters. An entire piece of rock history that had been effectively erased came roaring back to life. Here's what Festival Express actually turned out to be. A moment when Jerry Garcia would rather play free on a flatbed truck than watch a tour collapse. When Pigpen debuted harmonica on New Speedway Boogie, and nobody properly recorded it. When Rick Danko and Janis Joplin and Buddy Guy jammed on a train at 3 a.m. because they couldn't help themselves. Garcia called it the best time I've had in rock and roll. He added one detail. There were no straight people on that train. Ken Walker, who lost everything, remembered one moment. You should have seen Jerry blow that train whistle. He asked if he could drive. When the documentary dropped, YouTube clips started accumulating views. New Speedway Boogie and 4K remaster hit nearly 200,000 views. Don't Ease Me In drew fans who'd never seen the acoustic Dead. Pigpen's Love Light Ramp became a cult classic with 18,000 views. One Dead.net commenter made a connection. Buddy Guy singing Your Love Doesn't Pay the Bills is ironic given the ticket price protests. Another just wanted more. The documentary blew me away. I felt a contact high. Janis appears relaxed and natural. Forum discussions exploded. Fans who've been at the shows came forward. I was one of the protesters in Toronto. When Garcia started playing in the park, we forgot why we were angry. The Dead's archivists updated setlists with confirmed songs. The two Winnipeg tracks, Easy Wind and Candyman, finally got proper dates and venues. But questions remain. What else sits in those 90 hours that didn't make the documentary? Are the complete performances still in the vault? Did anyone record those Toronto Park shows? Sometimes you lose money, sometimes you punch a mayor, sometimes you play free because it's right. And sometimes 30 years later, someone finds 90 hours of footage and one of rock's greatest ghost stories becomes real. The Grateful Dead didn't save Festival Express from financial collapse. They just made sure it was legendary enough to matter when someone finally found the tapes.